4 armed thieves entered a bank in Argentina and took hostages. The police surrounded the place, and after several hours of negotiations, the robbers announced that they would surrender on the condition that the police provide them with pizza. The pizza was delivered, but suddenly the thieves cut off all communication channels with the police. The police decided to storm the bank, but when they entered, they found no one except the hostages. When they went downstairs, they discovered that the bank's vault had been looted, and there were no traces of the thieves or any evidence of how they escaped. There were no holes in the ground or any exit they could have used. The police immediately turned their attention to the hostages, suspecting that the thieves might have masqueraded themselves among them. So, I wonder, were the thieves really hiding among the hostages, or where did they go exactly? This is what we will find out in today's story. In the year 2006, the largest bank robbery in Argentina was carried out, a remarkably clever and intricate operation. The thieves who executed this operation were 4. The first was the leader, named Fernando Araujo. The second was the planner of the operation, Sebastian Bolster. The third was called Beto de la Torre, known as the financier, and the fourth was titled Luis Celanes, let's call him the violent. Additionally, there were 2 individuals who assisted them from the outside, but their identities and aliases have not been revealed. The first was known as the doctor, and the second was referred to as the boy. Now, I want you to keep these 4 names in mind. The story begins with Fernando, the leader and mastermind of the operation. Fernando, a character whose artistic temperament yearned for adventure, found an irresistible allure in the audacious notion of robbing a bank. This daring escapade promised not just the rush of adrenaline it craved, but also the canvas upon which he could paint an unconventional masterpiece of risk and reward. The heist, to him, was more than a criminal act. It was a performance art, a thrilling exploration of boundaries and consequences. Yet, as he delved further into this high-stakes venture, he wrestled with the complex interplay of his artistic ambitions and the moral dilemmas it raised, making his journey a captivating exploration of the human spirit's dual nature. Fernando was indeed determined to rob a bank, and he was going to execute the smartest and biggest bank robbery in the history of Argentina. During that period, Fernando would go out daily and roam the streets of the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires, to explore potential targets for the operation. He eventually found a bank called Banco Río, one of the well-known banks located in a very affluent area. This bank was where the wealthy individuals stored their belongings, money, jewelry, and valuable possessions. After that, Fernando began to think about the ways in which the operation could be carried out. The first plan was to enter the bank while it was open with their weapons and take the money available at the teller's counters, then quickly escape before the police surrounded the place. Nevertheless, this method had its drawbacks as it was highly risky and the loot would be minimal. The second way is to break into the bank when it's closed, and this approach typically requires digging a tunnel underground to reach the vault. However, this method has its own issues as it could be exposed quickly. The bank has thermal sensors and sophisticated alarm systems that could detect if someone entered the vault while it's closed. Both ways are difficult and carry high risks. Since Fernando was willing to take risks in any case, he decided that if he's going to do it, he should aim for the biggest loot possible, which means he would go with the second plan. He decided to dig the tunnel and enter the vault while the bank was closed. Fernando encountered a pleasant surprise that would save him all this effort. One day, as he was scouting the area, he noticed the sewer openings along the street in front of the bank. Every 10 meters, there was a sewer opening, indicating that there was an underground sewer tunnel passing in front of the bank. Fernando followed these openings along the street until he reached the sewer outlet. This outlet was a large opening located about 150 meters away from the bank. So, our adventurers had found the ready-made tunnel. Without hesitation, Fernando entered this sewer tunnel and began to explore it. At the beginning, the tunnel was square-shaped, but after walking a distance of about 100 meters, he reached a circular tunnel with a diameter of around 6 meters, making it a massive tunnel extending beneath the city and passing directly in front of the bank. Now, Fernando needed someone to assist him because it was impossible to execute this operation alone. The first person that came to his mind was one of his associates named Sebastian Bolster, whom we nicknamed the engineer because he was an expert in electronics and mechanical sciences. When Fernando went to Sebastian and presented him with the idea, Sebastian was taken aback. According to his knowledge, Fernando had no criminal past or experience in theft and such matters. All he knew about him was that he was someone who loved art and marijuana. How could someone like him be planning to rob a bank? However, Fernando wanted to share the details and the idea he had in mind, explaining how they could reach the vault through the underground sewer tunnel. At this point, Sebastian began to seriously consider the matter, even though he had never stolen anything in his life. Sebastian knew that with his expertise in electronics and mechanics, he could be a valuable asset in making this risky endeavor possible. Sebastian, the engineer, told the leader, Fernando, that he was fully committed to the operation. They brought measuring tapes and lowered them into the sewer openings. These tapes would aid them when they entered the sewer tunnel, helping them determine their exact location and the distance separating them from the surface. Afterward, they went inside the bank and discreetly took a series of pictures, even pretending to be new customers. They made their way to the bank's vault, located on the lower floor, to examine it. This allowed them to estimate its size and the number of safety deposit boxes it contained. There were hundreds of safety deposit boxes in the vault. However, despite all the calculations they had made, everything remained approximate. They lacked precise numbers, and to obtain those, they needed to acquire the building plans of the bank, which were likely held by the municipality. At this point, they realized they needed assistance from experienced individuals in the world of theft and heists. Additionally, they required financial support because the tools that Sebastian, the engineer, would create would need funding. Here, Fernando, the leader, started looking for a new partner to join their team. They got in touch with a person known as the Doctor. His identity remained undisclosed, and he played the role of a coordinator in the operation. The Doctor informed Fernando that he would connect them with suitable individuals to assist them in the heist. The first person he introduced them to was Beto de la Torre, whom they nicknamed the Financier. Beto had a criminal background and was associated with gangs. While he lacked direct experience in heists, he had expertise in the world of weapons. So, Fernando and the Doctor went together to meet Beto to explain the concept of the heist. Beto was thrilled when he heard the details, and Fernando asked him if he had the capability to finance the operation as they would need many resources. Beto sold his truck to finance the heist, solidifying his position as the third key member of the gang. Moving on, Fernando, the leader, was still in need of a fourth person, someone who could work with them in the hands on tasks that required strength. Sebastian, the engineer, would be busy manufacturing the tools. Beto, the financier, was the oldest among them, and his movements were slow. In any case, they needed another person to complete the team. The Doctor suggested the fourth person who would join the gang. This person's name was Louis Selines, and they nicknamed him the Violent. Louis was a seasoned gangster with a long history of criminal activities, especially in the realm of theft. He had executed numerous heists and had spent 15 years in one of the toughest prisons. The Violent, as his nickname suggested, had a hot temper, and you could always sense that he was ready for violence at any moment. Despite this, he was also clever, adept at deception, and had a skill for acting. He would play a crucial role in the operation. With the addition of Louis Selines, the team was complete, and each member brought their own unique skills and experiences to the table, making them a formidable force to be reckoned with in their ambitious bank heist plan. The gang was now complete, with Fernando as the leader, Sebastian the engineer, Beto the financier, and Louis the Violent. The four of them started discussing the details of the heist and went down together to the sewer tunnel. They observed the location and reviewed the calculations made by Fernando and Sebastian. The next crucial step was acquiring more accurate plans, specifically the blueprints of the bank building. Louis, the Violent, confidently assured them that he would get the blueprints for them. True to his word, a few days later, he presented the blueprints in front of them. They were grateful for the vital information he brought them, which would play a crucial role in their elaborate plan. Thanks to the detailed maps and blueprints provided by Louis the Violent, the team was able to precisely determine the location they needed to excavate inside the sewer tunnel. Using the data on the tunnel's length and the appropriate angle for excavation, they developed a comprehensive plan containing all the necessary calculations for the digging operation. This task was extremely delicate and precise, as every detail was crucial for the success of this grand heist plan. Sebastian the engineer led the efforts to transform the blueprints into practical and executable designs. They utilized all their skills and expertise in this critical step to ensure that everything was accurately accounted for, and they were ready to move on to the next stage of the operation. Afterwards, they started acquiring the necessary tools. They obtained a diesel-powered electric generator and brought in digging equipment and large drills. They began excavating on the side of the tunnel. There was always someone stationed above ground, monitoring the situation and making sure that the sound of drilling didn't reach the surface through the sewers. The excavation process was both tiring and stressful, given that it would take several months to complete. Now they needed to solve the next challenge, which was the thermal sensors and alarm devices that would be triggered once they entered the vault. Fernando came up with a brilliant idea to tunneling and armed infiltration. They would use the tunnel as an exit instead of an entrance, rendering the thermal sensors and alarms useless. The police would surround the area, thinking they have trapped the criminals, unaware that they would escape underground. The concept excited Fernando, and he researched if anyone had attempted a similar heist before, but found no such records. Upon sharing the new plan with the group, everyone was astonished and filled with excitement. Now, they needed to add weapons to their equipment. Beto, the financier of the heist, volunteered to take care of this aspect, drawing from his experience in the world of criminal activities and weapons. However, there was a mysterious twist. The weapons they would use would have something unique about them. This special element would remain undisclosed until the end of the story. So, keep this in mind and follow the story to its conclusion to discover what this mysterious element is. The whole operation took approximately a year to complete. They dug the tunnel, built a dam to raise the water level for rubber boats, essential for a faster escape with the loot. Afterwards, they discussed the escape route. The initial idea was to escape towards the outlet of the sewer and make their way out from there. On the other hand, they realized that the police would likely head to the outlet once they realized what was happening and could cut off their path. So, they started considering the second option, which was to escape in the opposite direction of the outlet. They discovered that this direction was much better because there were hundreds of exits along the tunnel. These exits were the sewer openings scattered every 10 meters. After studying the opposite direction, they identified a specific opening that they would use to exit, which was approximately 200 meters away from the bank's location. They decided to bring a van and park it directly above this sewer opening. On the van's floor, they would create an opening that aligned perfectly with the sewer opening below. This way, they could emerge from the sewer directly into the van without being seen by anyone. Indeed, Beto, the financier, acquired a small van and parked it in his garage. The gang gathered there to modify the van and create the opening in its floor as planned. They worked diligently to ensure that everything was set for their daring heist. Suddenly, while the gang was working, Beto's wife, Alicia Tullio, walked in on them. The entire gang became angry with Beto and questioned why his wife was there. Beto tried to reassure them, saying, "There's nothing to worry about." He mentioned that he trusts her completely. This was the first and only time that the gang members encountered Alicia Tullio, Beto's wife. Keep this woman in mind because she would play a significant role in the story later on. After the gang finished modifying the van, they now needed a driver. He would be waiting for them in the van until they completed the operation, and he would be responsible for driving them away once it was done. Everything was almost ready, except for one crucial thing. They needed a method to quickly open the safety deposit boxes inside the vault. With hundreds of boxes, it was impossible to open them manually. Engineer Sebastian designed a hydraulic tool they named the cannon. Its purpose was to break open the locks of the safety deposit boxes within 7 seconds each. This tool would be essential for the operation. Finally, after all the preparations and efforts, everything was in place just as you see it now. This is the sewer tunnel they will enter through with the boats, and this is the tunnel they dug that leads to the bank. Inside the bank's basement, you can find the vault with the safety deposit boxes. About 200 meters away is the sewer opening they will use to exit. Above it is the van with its floor open, which they will use for their escape. On January 13, 2006, the gang decided to execute the operation. Sebastian the engineer was the only one who entered through the sewer tunnel, and next to the tunnel's opening, the small rubber boats were ready with the tools, including the hydraulic cannon. The leader Fernando, Beto the financier, and Luis the violent gathered in front of the bank's entrance. Once they confirmed that everything was ready and everyone was in their positions, they stormed into the bank, brandishing their weapons. As soon as they entered, the gang members took the customers and bank employees hostage, ordering them to lie face down on the floor. The bank guard, who was in the surveillance room, quickly locked himself in and alerted the police. Within a few minutes, police patrols, which happened to be nearby, arrived at the scene in response to the urgent call. The situation escalated rapidly as the police surrounded the bank, and a standoff ensued between the authorities and the robbers inside. Fernando began to execute the theatrics he had planned, which he called the Coco Plan. The idea was to take one of the hostages and make it seem like they were attempting to escape through the bank's main door. However, the individual would quickly return to the bank upon seeing that the police had surrounded the place. The intention behind this act was to mislead the police into believing that they were planning to escape before they arrived at the scene. To further enhance their ruse, they had placed a fake getaway car in front of the bank, making it appear as if it were their escape vehicle. Pretending that the plan had failed, they found themselves trapped inside the bank with the police closing in on them. Indeed, the Coco Plan succeeded when the police chief arrived at the scene and received updates from the officers present. They were informed that the robbers had attempted to escape through the bank's main door but quickly returned inside upon realizing they were surrounded. Based on this information, the police chief assumed that the robbers were trapped and had no other way out. This belief gave the police a sense of confidence that they had the situation under control and that the robbers' escape road was cut off. However, little did they know that the situation inside the bank was still far from over, as the robbers had more tricks up their sleeves. Lewis negotiated, promising no harm if the guard cooperated. The guard resisted, so Lewis threatened a bank employee. Her tears broke him, and he surrendered to protect her. After Lewis, the violent member, took the guard's phone and led him to the bank's door, he was asked to step out and join the police and surrounding forces. The police inquired about the situation inside the bank. The guard reported that he had witnessed 3 armed robbers inside the bank, holding approximately 30 hostages. He informed them that the robbers had stolen his mobile phone. Fernando contacted the engineer, Sebastian, who was waiting outside the bank's vault walls in the tunnel. Fernando instructed him to break through the wall. Sebastian began digging from the outside, while Fernando moved a cabinet with drawers precisely to the spot where Sebastian was digging in the wall. After the hole was opened and Sebastian popped his head out, Fernando took a deep breath of relief because now it was certain that their tunnel was connected to the bank. Lewis the Violent was the one holding the phone, and he had an incredible talent for acting and deception. He managed to stall the police in an astonishing manner and created a persona that even the media covering the event began to recognize. They called him the man in the gray suit. Even the police was surprised when he received a calm and composed call from this person, as if nothing was happening. Lewis's acting skills were so convincing that he successfully deceived everyone around him, making it seem as though everything was under control and nothing was amiss. The police asked, "What are your demands? What do you want?" Lewis the Violent responded honestly, "Well, to be frank, we intended to rob the bank and make a quick escape. But you surrounded us faster than we expected. We don't want to harm anyone, but now we're not sure what to do." The police chief, who was observing Lewis the Violent through binoculars from a bank window and communicating with him over the phone, saw him sitting calmly, with one leg crossed over the other, appearing surprisingly composed. The police chief became intrigued by how this man remained so serene in such a tense situation. It was at this moment that he realized Lewis was an experienced individual with a criminal history. Lewis then spoke, "Listen, I have just been released from Sierra Chica prison after serving 15 years, and this is not my first robbery. I know your procedures and tricks, so I advise you not to try and play games with me. It could lead to something detrimental for the hostages." The police chief responded, "We won't do anything or play any tricks, but you release one of the hostages every once in a while to show us your goodwill." Lewis replied, "We are the ones who decide when to release the hostages," and then he abruptly hung up the phone on him. This was all the gang needed, time. One of the amusing incidents that took place was when Lewis the Violent and Beto the financier discovered an elderly woman among the hostages. It happened to be her birthday that day. They went to the small kitchen attached to the bank and brought her a small cake. As they gathered around her, they started singing happy birthday. It was a peculiar scene filled with a mix of joy and fear, with all the hostages singing along while lying on the floor. Then they set her free as a surprise gift. Louis the Violent continued his clever communication with the police chief, always coming up with new stories to keep them occupied. At one point, he suggested they negotiate with his private lawyer for their surrender, and he provided a phone number supposedly belonging to his attorney. When the police called that number, to their surprise, Louis himself answered, disguising his voice as a lawyer. He pretended to be on his way for negotiations, buying more time effortlessly. This man was truly brilliant, easily outwitting the police and extending their operation beyond the 2 hours they had initially planned for. In a span of 2 hours, Engineer Sebastian and Leader Fernando successfully opened 147 boxes, adhering to their pre-established time limit. They displayed prudence by choosing not to pursue further gains and instead halted the operation to mitigate potential risks, avoiding any unnecessary greed. Leader Fernando called Louis the Violent and informed him that they would initiate their escape plan from the bank. Here, Louis would use the final game they had saved for the end, a last resort against the police. He called the police and said, "Look, we've decided to surrender, but we know we'll be held in custody without proper meals for a long time. Before we surrender, we want pizza." Louis insisted on authentic Italian pizza from a specific restaurant located far away from the bank, aiming to delay the police as long as possible. The police chief agreed, saying they would get the pizza from that restaurant. After this conversation, Louis cut off all communications with the police. Afterwards, Louis ordered the hostages to remain lying down with their faces to the ground without making any movements. They threatened that any slightest movement would result in immediate gunfire. Meanwhile, Fernando and Sebastian, who were in the vault below, collected all the loot and stuffed it into bags. They then tossed these bags through the tunnel they had previously dug. Before making their escape, they spread a small piece of cloth on the ground and placed their weapons on it. At the end of the story, I will reveal the reason behind this move they made. So, after they exited through the hole they had dug in the wall, they returned the cabinet to cover the escape opening. Then, they placed something resembling a bomb on the hole. Without delay, they rushed down to the small rubber boats waiting for them under the tunnel. They loaded the bags filled with loot onto one of the boats and boarded the other one. The two boats were tied together with a rope. Afterwards, they swiftly moved through the sewage tunnel until they reached the exit point. They took their loot bags and climbed up the ladder. Up above, the van and its driver were waiting for them. They loaded the bags through the van's opening. The van barely had enough space to accommodate the large amount of bags they were carrying. They set off in the van, completely unseen by anyone, and drove away without a trace. Afterward, they headed to the secure hideout they had prepared beforehand. Once they arrived, they drove the van into the garage and unloaded their loot bags. The first thing they did was to turn on the television to watch the news and see what was happening. They wanted to know if the police were still on their trail or not. To their surprise, the police had not yet stormed the bank. The gang members watched the television with joy, as if they were watching a movie, celebrating their successful escape. After the arrival of the pizza that Louis requested, the police chief tried to communicate with him repeatedly, but all attempts to contact him failed. The chief decided it was time for the assault and ordered the special forces to be ready to respond to any armed escalation. When they stormed the bank, they discovered only the hostages lying on the floor. The burglars had concealed the escape hole in the wall, leaving the police perplexed about the thieves' whereabouts and their means of escape. In reality, they suspected the burglars had somehow blended in with the hostages. As the hostages exited the bank, they were treated as detainees until their identities were verified and any potential threat was eliminated. Following a period of raiding and searching, they eventually uncovered the concealed opening behind the drawer cabinet. Nonetheless, a new challenge arose when they encountered what appeared to be a bomb in front of it. This led them to summon the bomb squad for inspection, only to later realize it was a hoax device. All the while, the gang members sat and watched television, celebrating the success of their extraordinary heist. The gang, on their part, divided the loot among themselves without counting it, as counting would take a long time. Their loot was like a small mountain of money, gold, and jewelry. The bank estimated the stolen valuables to be worth $19 million. Let's not forget that this is in the year 2006, making it the largest bank heist in the history of Argentina. After dividing the loot among themselves, their plan was for each member to go their separate ways and start a new life without drawing attention or flaunting their wealth to avoid arousing suspicions. They wanted to avoid attracting attention or suspicion from authorities or anyone who might be investigating the bank robbery. By keeping a low profile and not drawing attention to themselves, they hoped to avoid being caught or identified as the perpetrators of the crime. They agreed never to see each other again to minimize any potential risks or connections. Each one took their share, got into their car, and drove in different directions. They were all obviously happy, but one of them quickly had his joy shattered. This person was Beto, the financier. When he returned home, his children and his wife, Alicia, were eagerly waiting for him. Remember Alicia, Beto's wife? I told you before that this woman would completely change the course of the story. Beto opened the bag and discovered that a large stash of money was missing. He went to his wife Alicia and asked her, "Tell me, did you take anything from this money?" His wife replied coldly, "Yes, I took 5 or 6 small bags. Each small bag contained around $300,000. Beto was upset and told her, "We are trying to hide from the authorities, and your actions will expose us. How could you take such a large amount without telling me? You will ruin everything." This led to an argument between them, and Beto asked her to return the money she took. However, his wife refused, and the argument escalated. In the end, Beto took his share of the loot in the bags he had at home and decided to hide them in another place. When Beto concealed the loot from his wife's view, she began to suspect that he had a secret lover. This suspicion caused her to feel extremely jealous and depressed. Surprisingly, she abruptly went to the police and reported him due to her sudden jealousy. Beto didn't have any secret lover. On the contrary, he loved his family dearly. Beto was arrested, and during the interrogation, he refused to disclose the identities of his accomplices. Nonetheless, with his wife's cooperation and other evidence, such as tracking their phones, the police were able to identify the 4 individuals who carried out the operation. Arrest warrants were issued against all of them, despite each of them going in different directions. In the end, all of them were apprehended. For instance, Fernando, the leader, was hiding in a remote and isolated tent, but the National Guard patrols managed to arrest him. As for the violent Luis, he fled to Uruguay, his home country, but even there, he was captured. Sebastian, the engineer, turned out to be the easiest to catch, as he was found in his own house. They were all arrested and brought to trial. It's astonishing that most of the stolen loot was not recovered. The thieves hid it in difficult-to-reach places and refused to disclose its whereabouts. Eventually, they were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 9 to 15 years, but none of them served their full sentence. Surprisingly, Fernando and Sebastian each spent only about 2 years in prison before being released on probation and confined to their homes for an additional 2 years. However, Beto and Luis, with their prior criminal records, had longer prison sentences. Luis spent approximately 6 years in prison, and Beto spent 8 years, which is still much shorter than the initial sentencing, which was relatively lenient. The question that comes to mind is this the punishment for an armed $1 million robbery? How are the sentences reduced to this extent? The main reason was the weapons they used. Remember when I told you that their weapons had something unique? And remember when I told you that when they came out of the bank, they placed their weapons on the ground in a clear manner? The reason was that their weapons and the bombs were fake, not real. Imagine that the gang was involved in a huge and elaborate operation like this, holding hostages and torturing the police and special forces with fake weapons. Of course, the reason is that if they were caught, which actually happened, they knew the sentences would be lenient. The judgment for armed robbery is very different from non-armed robbery, and this ultimately led to the light sentences and early release. However, the strange thing is that most of the stolen loot was not recovered. The bank's customers were compensated by the bank and insurance companies. There was a drama film made about this case, as well as a documentary film. In the documentary, all 4 of them were interviewed, and they seemed to be living their lives comfortably, talking about their heist and narrating the details, some of which were featured in today's episode. To be honest, the destiny of the stolen money remains a mystery. I plan to purchase a gold detector device and embark on a journey to Argentina in search of the loot. I'll then share it with everyone who supports and subscribes to the Adrenaline Crimes channel, and we may have reached the end of our story. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell button. There are also more amazing clips you can watch. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next video. If you enjoy the Adrenaline Crimes content and want to support the channel, you have a few options. You can use the Super Thanks feature right below this video to send a one-time tip, or consider becoming a channel member by hitting that join button to access some awesome perks. If you prefer Patreon or PayPal, the links are in the description below. Your support goes a long way in helping us create more content.